Hi, everybody, and welcome. My name is Ruth Ormston. I'm co-director of the Mindfulness Initiative, and I'm really pleased to be joined here today by my fellow co-director, Jamie Bristow.
Hello, nice to see you all. Or rather, nice to speak to you.
So the Mindfulness Initiative is a policy think tank that really grew out of a mindfulness teaching programme within the UK Parliament. And out of that group, there was a group of politicians who were very interested in the impact of mindfulness and the evidence behind it, and how that could address particular policy concerns. So the Mindfulness Initiative worked with them to produce in 2015 a seminal report called Mindful Nation UK, which you can still download from our website, mindfulnessinitiative.org, which looked at the evidence base for mindfulness across 4 different sectors: health, the workplace, education, and criminal justice. Since then, we've gone on to look at mindfulness within those 4 sectors, but also really grown to look at how mindfulness and compassion can perhaps address some of the most entrenched, complex, and difficult social and political issues of our time, such as digital distraction, political polarization, and what we're here to talk to you about today, the climate crisis. So we feel very honoured to work with leading academics and partners throughout the world. And on the report that we're going to talk to you about today, we were honoured to work with London University Centre for Sustainability Studies. We were also incredibly grateful to the Emergence Foundation for helping us with this particular piece of work. Without further ado, I'm going to tell you what that bit of work was. It's a report called Reconnection, Meeting the Climate Crisis Inside Out. And I'm incredibly pleased to introduce Jamie, one of the authors, who is going to tell us more about it. So, Jamie, please can you tell me why this report is needed?
Thank you, Ruth. Yes, so we've spent, as you said, the last, getting on for 8 or 9 years, looking at the application of mindfulness and compassion training in society. They have been used in different areas of public life to meet particular societal issues. So, for instance, addressing mental health concerns. But the intuition of many who advocate for mindfulness, who practice mindfulness and compassion, the sense that there's something sort of more profound, something deeper going on here, the deeper potential, perhaps, for these natural human capacities that can be trained to help us to become more equal to the great challenges of our times. So beyond these little sort of, somewhat instrumental benefits and applications, there's something more profound that is possible. And so we've spent the last 5 or 6 years or so trying to articulate and thread the evidence through a framework which presents mindfulness and compassion as foundational capacities to a flourishing society. And there's no greater, most pressing challenge, global challenge, as the climate crisis. 67% of species have now gone extinct since 1970. That the ecological collapse that could ensue if we don't, over the next handful of years, change radically alter course, could make our societies collapse and could lead to extinction, not just of other species, but of ourselves potentially. That is, a very, very real possibility. So that's the big, why. Like, there are aspects of the mind and heart, qualities of the mind and heart, that can be cultivated so that we are ourselves more equal to meeting these challenges. And why particularly a report on the climate crisis is also because there has been this whole inner dimension that I've just sort of alluded to, has been almost entirely ignored in mainstream sustainability sciences and policy making. That is changing, thankfully. And in fact, earlier on this week, on the 28th of February, an IPCC report the International Panel on Climate Change report, which is, you know, the where the evidence is collated, and that's how, you know, we act as a global community. It mentioned mental health. It mentioned the connection between inner and outer sustainability and transformation for the first time. So this is starting to sort of, like, you know, break through a little bit, but it's still largely absent. It's increasing in the peripheries, both amongst policymakers and amongst scientists. So we don't just need to pull together the evidence for mindfulness and compassion training and how that can help us here. We also need to make a case for the inner dimension, full stop, because, you know, there haven't been really policy reports in a sort of coherent and clear way making the case for including this. So we've been doing a job not just on behalf of these, you know, what we're particularly interested in, these trainable capacities of mind and heart, but also this wider dimension. Yeah, so that's the why.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm going to move on from the why to the how. So how can mindfulness and compassion help address the climate crisis?
Part of the why, sort of part of the how, is the work that we've done with Professor Christine Wamsler at the Lund University Centre for Sustainability Studies. You know, this is off the back of maybe over the last 5 to 10 years, there has been much more interest in the inner dimension of sustainability. And particularly, you know, about a third of papers at least are on mindfulness in that area. So this is, like, you know, big part of the work mentions these capacities. And in fact, one study recently looked at the kind of these inner capacities and found that mindfulness and compassion helps all of the capacities that are necessary to shift worldviews, values, beliefs, and behaviors. Anyway, so we did with Christine, we did a review of that literature, and also did some more research of our own. So we did 26 interviews with politicians around the world and policymakers. We did an extensive consultation amongst experts on the inner dimension of the climate crisis, of sustainability, and we looked at both what people were mentioning in terms of what are the important inner dimensions. You know, for instance, some people talked about the role of our attention, and particularly the role of the what they call the attention economy, that's sort of distracting and capturing our attention and selling it to the highest bidder, and what that means for our collective ability to pay attention to what really matters. So some people mentioned that. Others mentioned, interestingly, like how our sort of evolutionary threat responses, the fight, flight, freeze modes that we have in response to threat, like what effect they can have on how we respond to threatening information, like, you know, ecosystem collapse, etc., and how those, you know, and how our interpersonal neurobiology interacts with each other, creating potentially, you know, negative relational patterns that stop us being able to act together at scale. So we got all these different pieces of the puzzle, and we also listened to what experts and politicians who were starting to get an inkling about this stuff, what they said in terms of what the overall picture, or what the narrative is that can be told here. And you know, what we found in the policy world over the last, you know, 7 or 8 years is that a good story trumps a big pile of evidence, unfortunately. And that's what sticks. And our world is made of stories. We're narrative cognizers, you know, when we think in terms of stories. And so you could have all the scientists in the world telling you the facts, but if you don't have a clear, coherent way in which they fit together and they make sense of the world and what we have to do about the challenges, then they won't stick and they won't get acted upon. So what we were listening for in part through this work were the stories that were being told. How are people framing the inner dimension of the climate crisis? How does the mind interact with our external world and the climate? And we found 4 interesting things. Many policymakers are aware that mind is a victim of the climate, like particularly young people. There's eco-grief, anxiety, that's getting worse and worse. It's a major concern. But also many others are starting to become aware that actually the mind is the driver of the climate crisis fundamentally. that it's not just a random technical problem that we have to fix. There's actually a way in which the way we think about the world and our relationship with it that's broken or unhealthy. And within that domain, the people often, the thing, there's a lot of variance, but the thing that was clearest that was coming through for us was that the climate crisis is fundamentally a relationship crisis. It's about human relationships, and it's about a particular, and the kind of the cleanest narrative is that it's about separation and disconnection. We are disconnected from nature. Like, for instance, those who have a high level of nature connection, as it's called by scientists, are many times more likely to have sustainable behaviors, pro-environmental behaviors. Disconnection from each other, like feeling separate from other parts of the world, and like not understanding our behaviors have actions. Lack of understanding of interconnectivity in all of our systems, both nature and humans, and also disconnection from ourselves. Because it's our not really being in tune with what's most important to us, what our values are, not being aware of our emotions, actually repressing or denying our emotions, not being connected to our bodies. These are things which stop us, that are interconnected with these other forms of disconnection. So interestingly, though body awareness is really linked to empathy. So if we're aware of our bodies, we actually listen to our bodies and feel our bodies in order to understand the emotions of others. So these forms of disconnection are actually sort of highly interlinked. So, so the other forms of the interaction between mind and climate we had is that as well as mind being a driver of the climate crisis, it's a barrier. So we have like various biases and things that stop us actually acting upon it. And there are forms of disconnection there, disconnection from the truth. And then finally, there's a vicious cycle. That's the kind of fourth way in which like some policymakers are starting to see this. Those who understand that these other three pictures, mind is a victim, mind is a driver, mind is a barrier. It's also a vicious cycle. So mental health, poor mental health and well-being drives consumerism and unhealthy behavior. There's that link established in sustainability science. That then drives a worse situation, which drives greater fear, anxiety, more repression, denial, more mental health problems. It's a breakdown loop, some have called it. There is a possibility to have a breakthrough loop, and actually intervene in some of these ways. Improving mental health, improving resilience, improving like positive emotions, hope, optimism, but also helping us with our cognitive capacities, our relational abilities, our connection to ourselves, our bodies, our values, and connection to nature. Because there's evidence that mindfulness is associated with nature connection, that actually being in a wood or in nature isn't enough. You have to really be present with it to feel that connection to nature increase. And similarly, connection to nature helps you to become more mindful. The two reinforce each other. That's the kind of breakthrough loop that we're talking about.
Yeah.
So that's so doing this research, we worked out both what the important things are to talk about in terms of the evidence, threat response, trauma patterns, holistic worldviews versus sort of a worldview of separation, connection to values, to attention regulation. We got these important components, and we also got this grand narrative to fit those into. And the grand narrative, very appropriate for this conference, is reconnection. Reconnecting what has been disconnected through probably centuries, particularly of Western thought, modernist thinking that separates mind from body, doesn't even recognize the heart really is an important thing in some cases, but also separates us from each other, atomizes us in ways which are just not realistic, And we're seeing now through quantum physics and other forms of science that actually, and cognitive science, is showing us we are a mind, body, heart, interconnected being, interconnected with the world, and there is really no separation apart from that from which is created by the mind in order to kind of make sense of it logically. It has its limits. So we've done this work. We put this together into a report called Reconnection: Meeting the Climate Crisis Inside Out.
Thank you. Yeah, I love that about the report, and I love the fact that at the heart of it is reconnection, and like you said, reconnecting to ourselves, to each other, and not seeing the planet as something separate. Your report talks about the fact we refer to throwing things away and we're not throwing things away because they're still here and we're part of the planet. We're all connected.
Exactly,
yeah. the planet's future is very much linked to our future. So yeah,
there is no way. It's a
yeah.
kind of it's a fallacy.
Yeah, exactly. So if people have listened to that and sort of felt enthused, Jamie, where do they find the report, and what do you want people to do with it?
Yeah, good. Well, you can find it on our website, first of all. And in fact, we've launched it as a consultation draft just now. So until, I think it's the 23rd, 24th of February, if you manage to read it in time and you have some thought, sorry, yes, March, that's where we're at now. Then you can drop us a line if you've got any thoughts on it, because we're going to launch it for an audience of policymakers and politicians quite soon. But it's available on our website, the mindfulnessinitiative.org/reconnection. That's where you'll find it. And yeah, so we have recommendations for these policymakers. So we're not just putting this out there as a curiosity and a bit of theory. We actually want people to act on this. So in our first chapter, we look at the fundamentals of human connection. This is how the mind and the body, the mind, body, and the heart, the interconnected system, always support human connectivity and help us to reconnect. And then the second chapter looks at particularly the role of connection and reconnection in the climate crisis. And there we look at staying with the trouble, so that sort of resilience and turning towards difficulty. Joined up world, we call the second bit of that. So that's more like holistic mindset, nature connection, and then finally intention and action, the third section there. So looking at consumerism versus insight into what makes us more happy, and inner compass, values connection, and acting well. And each of those have, particularly in that second chapter, have real implications for how we respond to the climate crisis. So we have we have recommendations on sort of education, climate leadership development, what politicians need to know about the mind and how it interacts with, with this situation. This is sort of fundamental psychology that needs to be understood if we're going to get the full picture here and act appropriately. And particularly we make a recommendation about we need equitable access, by which we mean that up until now, it's largely been left up to individuals and companies, private companies, to train employees or people to, take courses themselves in mindfulness and compassion training, in mindfulness and compassion. And this should be a public policy concern, because if you don't, then it just, the people who can afford it develop themselves, get greater capacities of mind and heart, and those who can't don't, and it increases health and social inequalities. So yeah, this must be an issue for government.
Yeah. Thank you, Jamie. I think we're coming up to time, so thank you very much for telling us about the report. Thank you, everybody, to listening about it. Please do go down to our website to download it. And as Jamie said, we would absolutely love to hear your thoughts and feedback on it. We really want people to be part of this conversation, because it's a collective solution that's needed, not one that's individual. So any final words, Jamie, on the report, or what you'd like people to do?
Yeah, if you haven't got a practice of your own, some kind of practice that helps you to cultivate what you like within yourself, what you find good and beautiful, the capacities of heart and mind, like compassion, like the awareness of, like mindful awareness, then explore that. Mindfulness might be for you, compassion might be for you, there might be other things as well. But we all need to be cultivating consciously the better angels of our nature in order to, meet what we're now facing.
Thank you. What a great note to end on. Thank you very much, Jamie.
Thank you.